Hi everyone, Luke here from Weekend Tour Pros. We're back again today in the studio, and today we're going to film something a little bit different. We're going to test an old wedge versus a brand new wedge to see if there really is a performance drop-off, just like some of the manufacturers claim. So will we see a difference in spin? Will we see a difference in carry? Will we see a difference in ball flight? Let's put all of those things to the test. Okay, so just before we start hitting the shots, I just want to tell you about the two clubs that we're using today. So both of these clubs are Titleist Vokey wedges in a 60-degree loft with a 10 bounce and an S grind. The only difference is that the new wedge is an SM9 and the old wedge is an SM7. Now the new SM9, I've had this for a couple of weeks now, and I've played a couple of rounds of golf with it, and I've used it for a little bit of practice, chipping practice before I've been going out on my rounds. So it's had kind of a couple of rounds of wear on it. The SM7 on the other hand, I've had for probably about 3 years I think now, and I've probably played between 100 and 150 rounds of golf with it, and I've used it a lot for short game practice. I've used it in lessons. I definitely use it whenever I'm doing my bunker practice because my 60 degree is my kind of go-to greenside bunker club, and you can probably see that from all the up-close shots that I'm showing you now, just how much wear this wedge has got. Now I think it's Vokey themselves that recommend that you change your wedges after 75 rounds, so I've definitely played a lot more rounds than Vokey would recommend keeping this wedge for. In terms of any other differences, you'll see that both of these clubs have got the same grip on them. There is a slight difference in shaft. I've got some new irons coming and the wedges now have the same shaft as my new irons, but I don't think that's going to make too much of a difference compared to me as a handicap golfer with my strike and quality of strike. In terms of the three tests that we're going to do today, we're going to start with a 10-yard chip shot where I kind of imagine that I'm slightly short-sided and need to kind of pop it up, get it over, a little obstacle and stop it quickly on the green. We're then going to go to a 20-25-yard pitch shot where I put the ball a bit further back in my stance, try and kind of hit it in a little bit lower and see if we can just get that spin number up a little bit. And we'll then finish with hitting some full shots with both of these wedges to see how the numbers perform throughout a variety of different shots. Right, let's get stuck in. Okay, so let's see what the old wedge does, shall we? Let's see if those spin rates are any different. Okay, so just done with the first part of the test, hitting a 10-yard chip shot with the old and the new wedge. My overriding feelings in the bay is that at the top end, the spin that both of these wedges are capable of is very, very similar actually, and it felt like they were both spinning at really good sort of mid 4,000s, low 4,000s quite consistently. The one potential variability or difference that I saw in the bay is that the older wedge maybe had more of a kind of inconsistency of its spin. It definitely felt like when I didn't strike it as clean, the drop-off was a little bit more significant. Certainly some of the shots fell into the 2,000s versus in the kind of low 3,000s with the 60-degree wedge. It just felt that maybe throughout kind of the range of shots, there was a little bit more kind of spin with the newer wedge, but really keen to look at the numbers in a bit more detail and see if that's backed up in the data. So let's take a deep dive into the data from that 10-yard chip shot to see if it backs up the feels that you've just heard me describe in the bay. Starting on the left-hand side, you can see that my club head speed with the new wedge was a fraction higher, but the ball speeds were identical. And what that actually means is that the smash factor with the old wedge was a fraction higher. So I'm not saying that one is better or worse there. Some people might say the old wedge is better because the smash factor was better, but I think on a 10-yard chip shot, that's all to do with quality of strike. In terms of the spin rates, this is where it gets really interesting. I was expecting to see a significant drop off throughout this test with the old wedge. You can see here that 3943 revs per minute versus 4046. It's just 100 revs of difference on a 10-yard chip shot. Now it's going to be really interesting to see if that trend continues as we move our way through this test. In terms of ball flights, I was trying to visualize hitting a short-sided shot where I popped it up and got it to land softly. We can say here that the new wedge did achieve that a little bit better. The launch angle of 36.2 was 1.4 degrees higher than the old wedge. Although the peak heights were the same, the land angle at 38.3 was also 1.4 degrees steeper, stopping power into that green than the old wedge. What does that actually mean in terms of actually what happened on the green? Well, you can see here that the carry number with both of these clubs was 10.3 yards on average, but the new wedge did stop 0.3 of a yard quicker. 0.3 of a yard is about 1 foot, so effectively we've got 1 foot of extra stopping power on a 10-yard chip with the new wedge. Now I don't know about you, I think I'd really struggle to notice that out on the golf course. The one thing that is just worth talking about at the end is the consistency of the numbers, in particular the consistency of the spin. We can see here that the new wedge had a consistency, so a standard deviation between the highest spin and the lowest spinning of only 240 revs versus 539 with the old wedge. So there definitely is less spin consistency with an older wedge, but that probably isn't a surprise. The key thing here though is it's not too significant. Let's move on to the slightly longer pitch shot. So it seems like quite consistently we're getting around that sort of 5,000 mark, whether it's just under, just over. That felt good. Okay, so just finished the second part of the test hitting the 25-yard pitch shot with both the new and the old wedge. Feelings in the bay are really similar to that 10-yard chip shot actually, where I'm really struggling to notice a difference at the top end of what the spin rates both these clubs are capable of, but definitely can see a bit more variability and a bit more drop off in the spin, potentially when the strike's not as good with the older wedge. So I think the consistency of the spin with the new wedge is certainly a little bit better, or at least that's the feeling I'm having in the bay. But let's go home and look at that data side by side to see if the numbers back that up. Right, let's continue that deep dive into the data with the data from those pitch shots. So you can see from the left-hand side that my club head speed and my ball speeds are very, very similar with both of these clubs, and as a result, the smash factor at 1.03 is absolutely identical. We can see once again that there is a slight reduction in spin with the older wedge at 4691 versus 4916 with a new wedge. That's 225 revs of difference. I don't think that's too significant, particularly in the hands of a handicapped golfer where there will be an element of strike dictating some of these results. It is interesting that the discrepancy has gone up a little bit as the shots got a little bit longer. It was 100 revs in the 10-yard chip shot. It's now about 225 in that kind of 20 to 25-yard pitch shot. So it'd be interesting to see if that trend continues as we move up to longer shots in the next part of the test. In terms of ball flights, on this part of the test, I was trying to get the ball backwards in my stance and hit a kind of slightly lower shot that grabs into the green as quickly as I can get it to do. We can see the new wedges achieve that a little bit better, but I really am nitpicking the differences here. That launch angle at 29.1 is 0.6 of a degree lower, the peak height's a foot lower, and the land angle is 0.6 of a degree lower, but I really am nitpicking. What does this mean overall? Well, actually nothing really, because the carry number and the total number exactly the same at 20.4 and 26.3 yards. I think the key thing to call out here is the old wedge is achieving it with a fraction less spin and a slightly higher ball flight. The new wedge is achieving it with a bit more spin and a slightly lower ball flight, maybe that more tour preferred ball flight you would argue. The final thing to call out is just the consistency again of these two clubs, in particular that spin consistency. At 572 revs, we can see that it is less consistent than the new wedge at 265, but again, I think particularly on a partial shot, my strike and my ability to hit a consistent shot time after time is probably a bigger overriding factor here, but I do think it's just worth calling that out. Now let's see if these trends continue as we move up to the full shot. Ooh, drop the glove there. Let's see what the old wedge does. Definitely feels like the old wedge is performing really well in my hands. Okay, so just done hitting the full shots with both the wedges there, and I must admit the old wedges really impressed me. I was expecting to see quite a significant drop off in this part of the test, but just looking at the spin rates on the screen behind me, the consistency of the spin and how high the spin rate was with the old wedge was really impressive. Now I do think the highest spinning shots might have been with the new wedge, when we'll check that data when we get home, but I think overall when we look at the average of the data sets, I think they're going to be really similar. Let's go home and take a look at that data now. Right, I hope you're sitting down somewhere because this is about to get really interesting. Starting on the left hand side, you can see that the club speed and the ball speed with the new wedge are about 1 mile an hour faster, but the smash factor with both at 0.96 is the same. Now that 1 mile an hour of extra ball speed does equate to about 1 yard of carry distance, so bear that in mind when we pull up the carry number in a second. But here is the headline number, the bit you've all been waiting for. The old wedge in this part of the test spun more than the new wedge. Let me repeat that. The old wedge spun more than the new wedge. This is absolutely a surprise to me and probably a surprise to you, particularly given what you've seen in the other parts of the test. For a bit of context, I hit 10 full shots with each of these wedges. So this is the average of those 10 full shots. And what I would say is that the two highest spinning shots were with the new wedge, but equally the two lowest spinning shots were also with the new wedge. Now that could be a little bit of strike on my part, getting used to my new wedge still, but look, the data speaks for itself here. The old wedge is performing absolutely fantastically. You can also see, if I just pull up that spin consistency right now as well, that the consistency of the old wedge was slightly better than the new wedge here as well. The old wedge is still spinning really well on full shots. In terms of ball flights, we have seen some slight differences, albeit real nitpicking on the other parts of the test. Here, for me, it's a draw. You can't pick out the differences between the launch angle, the peak height and the land angle. I think if you're out on the golf course, you wouldn't notice the difference between these two sets of data. What does that mean in terms of carry and stopping power? Well, the carry number with the new wedge is about 2 yards longer. Like I say, I think a yard of that is the slightly extra ball speed that I got in this part of the test. But the really interesting thing is the stopping power, the difference between the carry and the total is virtually identical. It's actually 0.1 of a yard in favour of the old wedge. So the old wedge is stopping a little bit quicker in this part of the test too. I bet you weren't expecting that, because I certainly wasn't. So what does that all mean? Well, let me give you my concluding thoughts. So I just want to finish the video by taking you back to that question I posed in the title and in the thumbnail. Do you really need new wedges? And I think the answer is maybe not. We can see there was some slight benefit to a newer wedge on those shorter shots where we got a slightly preferred ball flight and a fraction more spin and a little bit more consistency in spin, but we could certainly see that the old wedge held its own and actually slightly outperformed the new wedge in those full shots. Now the reason I say maybe not and not a definitive no to that question is I think it depends if your current wedges were fitted for you. Now me personally, I've had 3 sets of wedges in the time that I've been playing golf. The first set of wedges were a set that I bought off the rack, a set of Clevelands off the rack that I bought without a wedge fitting. I then got fitted when I bought my SM7s, which is the old wedge that you've seen in this video, and I got fitted again when I bought my SM9s, the new wedges that you saw in this video. I personally saw a much greater jump in terms of my wedge performance and the numbers that I got from having that initial fitting where they dialed in the correct lofts for me to gap my bag, the correct bounces and the correct grinds to match the shots that I hit and the conditions that I play in. Now, it's not me criticising Cleveland wedges. I think Cleveland wedges are fantastic. I just wasn't fitted for them at the time. And as a result, the jump from my SM7s to my SM9s that have got the same lofts, the same bounce, the same grind, the only thing that's marginally different is the shaft and the finish on them, I've not seen as much of a difference. So what I can safely say is that the shelf life of a Vokey wedge is really high, and I would expect that to be the same with most of the other manufacturers' wedges as well. So if you were fitted for your wedges, maybe do consider keeping your money in your pocket at the moment, particularly if they're only 3 to 4 years old and you've taken good care of them. All that leaves me to say is thanks so much for watching my video. If you've liked the video, please do consider giving it a thumbs up, and if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please do consider subscribing to the Weekend Tool Pros movement. Have a great day. Goodbye.